سلام 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 Peaceful, 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 peace.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, assalamu alaikum, which means peace be unto you. Welcome to another episode of the Deen Show. You want to know about Islam? You've come to the right place. You want to know about Muslims? You've come to the source. Our next guest is the author of some very unique books. We're going to be talking to him. We're going to be talking about how he came to Islam. Sit tight, you don't want to go nowhere with our next guest coming up, Dr. Brown. We'll be right back on the Deen Show.
Salam, 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 peaceful, 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 peace, peaceful, 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 peace.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Dr. Brown, thank you for being with us on the Deen Show. It's a treat.
My pleasure.
Sorry, Dr. Brown or Officer Brown?
No, Dr. Brown.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the people, our audience, just got to read a little bit about you. Why don't you just briefly tell us, they got to see that you had graduated, you're a doctor, you were an officer, a retired major in the Air Force, is this correct? Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, I don't know if you really can say retired, because that, in most people's minds, means that they spent 20 years in the military.
Yeah.
I was 16 years, 8 years in active reserves and 8 years active duty. But the bottom line is that I'm an ophthalmologist. I'm a specialist in cataract and refractive surgery. I'm the medical director of a major eye center. During the last 10 years, I've authored a number of books about Islam. I first became Muslim about 14 years ago, and in the first few years, it was just accelerated learning. I got to a point where I realized that there was basically an absence of literature with regard to certain subjects, and I felt that void needed to be filled, and that's what started me on writing. So over the last 10 years, I wrote a series of 5 books. Many readers might know the first one. It's called The First and Final Commandment. However, I have now rewritten that into 2 books. One is called Misguided, and the other is called Guided. Those are basically volumes 1 and volumes 2 of The First and Final Commandment. The latest book, the one I'm most excited about, is The Eighth Scroll. And the reason that I'm excited, and I feel others should be as well, is that that's actually an action adventure. It's a novel, and it's a very exciting, very fast-paced book, and it's a book that people will read because they enjoy it, but at the same time they'll take home a deeper message. So that's about it.
Let's talk about, people are excited, because you mentioned the word excited. I'm sure they're excited to hear how you came to Islam. Talk about this, talk about your past religious experiences and what led you to Islam.
Sure. Actually, you know, it's kind of a fun topic for me, because most people assume that I was Christian before I became Muslim. Mm-hmm. And I have to correct them. I have to tell them, no, I was trying very hard to be a Christian. I had tried for many years to be a Christian in many different ways, and it just never worked out for me. And I get a lot of funny looks when I say that. But the bottom line is that what happened was that I started on a spiritual search about 19 years ago. I had a daughter who was born with what's called a coarctation of the aorta. It's a lethal problem, meaning that a child born with this condition most often dies, and they usually die in a particularly bad way, meaning that they have open heart surgery, and then a few years later they repeat the open heart surgery, and then a few years later they repeat it. As the child is growing, they have to increase the size of the graft, and in the end these children die. So this was the first time when I got the news of her condition. This is the first time in my life I felt I had no control. I couldn't do anything about this situation. Every time before in my life when there was a problem, I dealt with it on my own. If I needed more money, I worked harder. If this needed fixing, I found somebody or I fixed it myself, etc., etc. And everybody knows what I'm talking about. When this baby was born, her name was Hannah, she went straight to the intensive care unit. Her body from here down was almost the color of my suit, closer to the color of your suit, just kind of a dusky gunmetal blue, because her body was not getting oxygen. Her body was literally starving in front of our eyes. Oxygen starved in front of our eyes. And that part of her body was literally dying. And when I saw that, like I said, it was the first time in my life that I needed to turn to some greater power. I was atheist up until then. I had been raised in a family that was basically Quaker, one of the Protestant sects, but not practicing. And I myself had never taken on any religion. So I had to leave the intensive care unit because they brought in a team of doctors, a team of specialists in the field. And while they were doing their thing, I just went to the prayer room. And for the first time in my life, I really prayed. And I prayed kind of the typical atheist prayer. There's a prayer called the prayer of the skeptic. The prayer of the skeptic goes like this: "Oh God, if there is a God, save my soul, if I have a soul."
Yeah.
Okay, that's the prayer of the skeptic. And most atheists, when they pray in this way. They say, "Oh God, if you are there," because they're not quite sure. And that's basically what I prayed. I just said, "Oh God, if you're there, I don't know if you're there or not, but if you are, I need help." And I made a promise to my Creator on that day. I promised that if He would save the life of my child and then guide me to the religion that was most pleasing to Him, that I would follow. And that was the simple promise. And I was only away for maybe about 15 or 20 minutes. But when I went back into the intensive care unit, my daughter was on the other side of the intensive care unit. And when I entered the door and looked across the room, the doctors raised their faces from my daughter. And I could see right away something had changed. Their faces were mystified, as if they didn't really understand what was going on, maybe a little bit shocked. When I walked up to them, they simply told me that she was going to be okay, and that she wouldn't die. And sure enough, she went back to being a completely normal child in all respects. I mean, normal quirks, but completely healthy. She didn't have surgery. She didn't need medication. Just her condition completely reversed. And here's the thing: we had an ultrasound film of her heart beforehand, and we had an ultrasound film of her heart after. And before, she had the problem I told you about. After, it was completely gone, stone cold normal. And I remember the doctors sort of went through an explanation, trying to make sense of it to me, trying to make sense of it to themselves. And I feel that they bought that explanation, but I remember standing there looking at them just thinking, I know that explanation works for you, but it just doesn't work for me. I prayed this prayer. And I just have to believe that this was the hand of my Creator. So I knew He had made good on His promise, and I had to make good on mine. So that started me on a religious search. And I thought I would find the truth in Christianity. I studied Judaism first. That led me to studying Christianity. I thought I'd find the truth there for years. I tried to convince myself. I tried to become Christian. I went to Seventh-day Adventist, Mormon, Quaker, Southern Baptist, Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox. I don't know exactly how many different sects, how many different churches I went to trying to find the truth of Christianity. And I always kept coming up against the same thing. I always kept liking some part of it, but having trouble with others. And when it came down to the tenets of faith, I would talk to the priests, and I would say, well, how about this? And they couldn't explain it. And how about that? And they couldn't explain that. And well, what about this? they'd kind of shrug their shoulders, and I'd just say, well, you know, thanks anyway, and move on to the next congregation.